Maximilian, welcome to the podcast. It is so great to have you here. Now, I was trying to think up last night of a way to introduce you, but you do so many the outdoor activity that you kind of specialize in requires such a wide skill set. I guess I would introduce you as a high alpine mountaineer that is, as of somewhat recently, ticking off some major peaks all over the Alps. A former doctor who has shifted into the outdoor industry fully after practicing for 15 years, and now an outdoor photographer and videographer. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I think that's quite right. I would just like probably reduce it to a person who is just passionate about being outdoors. Um, sure, I love the high alpine because it's such a special place, and it makes you really feel nature in a really special way. Um, and that's very much different to lower regions, but they still offer absolutely incredible places and opportunities to find small details that enrich life.
I like that reduction and simplification. It makes things easier. But I will say, watching some of your films, the high alpine stuff is striking and dramatic and incredibly beautiful. So it's a really great environment that you play in. Now, how did you get started in the outdoors? Has this been a lifelong thing or something that you've picked up a little bit later in life?
I grew up actually mostly outdoors, so I think like in 80 years or in 25 years I've been living with my parents. We did like one holidays spending on the beach, and all the others been like camping in a van, going whitewater, kayaking outdoors, cycling. Not too much climbing actually, but yeah, if you're like able to move in a slippery river, so I think it's quite similar if you walk out on an icy rock or whatever, crampons. So I think this helps quite a lot, even though I started out with really mountain climbing quite late. And there's like this big point in my life which actually really made this step for me logical, because I've been to Nepal 2014, um, like for 6 weeks, working as a medical doctor in a hospital there for 2 weeks. And afterwards, I went kind of the classic trekking in the Everest region. And yeah, I've been stepping once as a child on a glacier, but yeah, it's the first time I really stepped on one and just like embraced it and felt it. And it was just like when I came back to Switzerland afterwards, I was like, I want to do this regularly. So this is probably a really big key point. And there was like this one peak, the Finsteraarhorn, which is nearly 4,300 meter high peak, located in the Bernese slash Valais Alps in Switzerland. And I saw it and I was like, I want to climb this one. The problem was I didn't have any clue how to do that. So I didn't know how to move on a glacier. I didn't know anything about rescuing out someone out of a crevasse, how to avoid to fall in a crevasse, which is probably way more important. Um, and the other point was I was not willing to pay the price for a mountain guide, because it's very expensive here in Switzerland, and it was like 1,500 Swiss francs, so it's probably the same amount in dollar. Um, and I was like, I think it's a matter of respect if you train yourself that much that you can climb the peak by yourself. And that's basically what I did. So I was fortunate enough that there is like this international diploma of mountain medicine, which is kind of an education for medical doctors. But to be honest, it's just an education in mountaineering, to be honest, and it's paid by the hospital. So it's quite a fair deal, you know. And that's what I did, and I learned everything I needed to know. And in 2015, I climbed my first 4,000-meter peak in Switzerland, which was the Mönch, and a day later the Jungfrau. And yeah, that's the way it started, basically, with the high alpine mountaineering. I climbed several of different other peaks which aren't 4,000 meter high, but I tend to enjoy them more because usually they're not that busy. It's been just kind of a big trend in the last few years, climbing those peaks. So that's why, I tend to climb those little bit smaller peaks and enjoy the silence.
Well, excuse me. Now, this is an interesting avenue to talk about. You've already kind of mentioned the 4,000-meter peaks, and I know Nepal has, of course, Everest and some of the highest peaks in the world that are on the far end of the spectrum. I think that's in the 8,000-meter range. It seems like, though, from watching your films and looking at it a little bit more, almost counterintuitively, the peaks that you climb require while they're smaller, they require a much higher technical understanding. Would that be a fair assessment of the skill set involved?
Yeah, usually there are no fixed lines, or just on a few points there are fixed lines. And I think it's hard to compare actually with climbing Everest or these kind of peaks, which is, this is a commercial undertaking. And, probably more than 50% of the people which are climbing, sorry if I just say that, but most of them are not climbers or alpinists in their daily life. They're managers or whatever, and they just like have these dreams to climb once in a lifetime on Everest for different kind of reasons. I'm not judging that. But like going out in the Alps, and depending on the peaks, there are peaks which are really, really busy, and there are peaks that aren't that busy, and they're probably more technical, and there are no fixed lines. But on the other hand, you still have kind of the altitude with 4,000 meters, but it's not comparable like with 8,000 meters if you're not going with oxygen. If you go with oxygen, you basically scale down the Mount Everest to a 7,000 meter peak, which is still high, and I'm not judging that, but it's not the same experience as far as I've been told from various athletes who have been there without oxygen. So I think it's hard to compare, but I can understand the fascination of being there, but I'm not really interested in this kind of things. But I'm still have the dream, and I will definitely fulfill that to accompany an expedition to one of those peaks. Not necessarily needs to be an 8,000 meter peak, but I just like want to experience that one time, to be there as a photographer, as a videographer. And the good thing is I can also work as a medical doctor for them, so it might be pretty interesting for them in the abilities that I have, even though I'm not working actively as a medical doctor these days. But I still remember all the things I need to know.
So now, going back to your story, in your transition a little bit, what type of medical doctor were you?
Yeah, so after my studies, I've been studying in Germany. Originally from Germany, I just like moved to Switzerland straight afterwards, mainly because of the education, which I like more in Switzerland. Because in Switzerland, you're able to do different kind of subjects in the medicine and still count it for your education as the final doctor you're getting. This is something I really like, and it's not possible in Germany. So I started out to become a surgeon, and did quite a lot of surgery and emergency medicine, which is probably the thing that fits the most to me, because I really like those situations when it's hectic and you need to decide really immediately. That's something where I'm really, really strong. But I realized, and as I've been working 20 hours a day after like 1 year, that I love the job, but it's not really good for myself because I don't have time to be outside, and so also the the people there, it's not always friendly there, to be very honest. And
Okay.
so I just like, yes, you know, the best thing what can happen if no one is telling you something. So then it's the thing when you did it good. Um, yeah, just ask your question.
Yeah. No, for sure. I wanted to make sure you'd finished talking there. Now, but that skill set must of being able to think and process in kind of a high stress environment. That's got to translate very well to the mountains and some of the conditions that you've been in.
Absolutely. And I'm always telling all the people that you can so many things from mountaineering for daily living. And probably the most important thing you will need to learn is to make a decision. And I think many people just like they don't like to meet a decision. And in mountaineering, you don't have a choice. And your decision will have a directly impact. So if you decide to not lose on your gut feeling and to proceed, this may have a bad consequence for you. And so that's something which is super inspiring. And I have had several situations where I had a really, really bad gut feeling.
Mm.
And I never had any problems about that to turn around, even though it's 10 minutes below the summit. So I'm totally fine with that. And I think that's something that keeps you alive. If you lose that, it might get pretty serious out there. Um, so that's something I'm really thankful about it. And so it just like showed me, or it learned me, that I can trust my gut feeling. And this is something which helps quite a lot because you have decisions in life as well where you think like, what should I do? Should I do this or that? And if you know that usually your gut won't actually like be false or wrong, this will make things way easier to make a decision, even though it might seem risky.
Now, that I find that really compelling, and I will say in watching some of your videos and sometimes when you have to turn around, it does strike me as is that it doesn't weigh very heavily on you. You seem to make the decision with ease. One of the aspects, though, that I guess I would find difficult is if you're 10 minutes from the summit. I mean, you can see the summit; it's right there. Almost feels like it's within your grasp. Do you struggle in those cases where you feel like, oh, you could just make it if you push real hard, you can get it and turn around, or how is it that you're able to mentally make the right call and turn around right there?
Um, in mountaineering, it's kind of this, if you have like these ambitious projects, these long days where you're not sleeping in a hut, so maybe you start in the valley and go up all the way in a single push. It needs to be, everything needs to be in a flow. And what I've learned, if there's one moment where you have doubt and just like this flow just like stops, that's the moment when I turn around. And the thing is, and that's pretty interesting, I don't have any problems in this moment to accept that. But when I turn back and when I'm back at my car or back home, sometimes I think about, was it the right decision or could I have made it?
Ah,
But
okay.
then I reflect back to the moment where I made the decision. I was like, no, in this moment it felt like the right decision to turn around, and that's fine. I come back.
Interesting. And is it when you say you have a bad feeling, is it most often weather that causes you to turn around, or snow conditions, or is it a wide variety of factors that you're assessing?
It's not always the same. Weather can be a point. But weather is here in the Alps mostly pretty predictable. So I think, I don't know if you have ever been to Patagonia or these kind of regions. And if you have been there and there's been some mountaineering out there, then you come back to the Alps. I always call it kind of the wellness alpinism, because like there's a road everywhere, there's a cell phone reception everywhere, there's a helicopter just around the corner which will pick you up if you have troubles. So that's something that I think you can, yeah, pretty much like see when you plan it, if the weather will be a problem or not. And it's quite a lot of experience to like make the right guesses in terms of weather. So as a photographer, I'm obviously looking quite a lot in the weather forecast, and so you like at some point you can pretty much estimate how it's gonna be. So that's something you can like think about in the forehead. But it's more like the temperatures which may concern. If it's too warm, if the zero or the freezing level is too high, that's something that concerns me. It can be the snow conditions, and sometimes it can be, and that's probably the biggest problem. You just like plan your tour, you expect kind of conditions, and then you are on site and you realize it's different. And that's something that you learn, or I've learned over time, to calculate that risk, that you like maybe face different conditions that you expect. Like maybe 4 days, 5 days ago, I did like an alpine hike here just behind my house, and I didn't expect too much snow, and I knew that this could happen, but I knew like I could down climb, but I would try to avoid it if possible. But I just like anticipated it before I actually started. But sometimes it's not something I really can tell. You have probably seen the video from the Weisshorn, and I've been nearly hit by a rock there. And the thing is with this project, we're going to talk about later probably, it was a pretty tight schedule. And the Weisshorn is one of those peaks which has a very short window in the season where conditions are really good. So where you can do it pretty safe and pretty quick. Quite often it's like the speed is kind of a safety feature if you're not overdo it. But the conditions were okay. We knew that we would be probably the first really rogue team to be on the summit, or the second of the season. But yeah, that's what I knew. But that was not something that I was concerned about. It was just like a feeling on that day, or when we just like walked there or to the hut the day before. I just felt it that I need to be careful on this peak. But I can't tell you actually what was the reason. It was just like a gut feeling. And as you can see in the video, I was right. I was lucky, and I was aware of the situation, and I knew that there is potentially rockfall from parties which are above you. But yeah, another point where I can tell you my gut feeling was right, and I was lucky in the moment that nothing happened.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear your thoughts on how you rely on your gut feeling and intuition in these mountains. You did mention your project, or alluded to it, and I think would be a good time. It'd be a good time to introduce that project. It's how I found your work. So what is the 21 in 21?
So the 21 in 21 is a project. The thing is, like, there are 48 Swiss 4,000 meter peaks, and in 2020, when all the COVID happened, and we couldn't really travel a lot or leave the country, I was like concentrating on the 4,000 meter peaks a little bit more. I've done some in the years before, but I've never been like focusing a lot on it. And things went pretty well, and I could tick off some tours I wanted to do since a long time. And in the end of 2020, there were like 21 4,000 meter peaks left. And you probably know Cody Townsend, who is a former athlete in skiing, and he has this project, the 50, doing a YouTube episode about every line he's skiing. And this was basically like the thing I was like, okay, I'm gonna do the same thing, but with the 4,000-meter peaks. Um, and just like try to catch up with some brands, ask them if they want to be a part of it, offer them that I'll do some photos and for sure a YouTube video about every tour I'm gonna do. And yeah, that was basically the project. I made kind of a schedule, um, and just like started off. That's basically the whole and simple story about the project. Um, and the thing is, like, I was like, yeah, I mean, I've been doing like 2400-meter peaks in 2020. Some of them I had done before, so I was like, yeah, I think that's pretty doable. And they're like from the 21, they're like 10 or so on one single tour, which will be 2 or 3 days. And so I was like pretty optimistic that I actually could do it. But like when like slowly the spring basically arrived, and spring is usually the time of the year when you start with ski mountaineering, those higher peaks. Um, I just like slowly felt the pressure, and you're not really patient when you have this kind of project announced brands and everyone's watching when you're starting and all this kind of stuff. Um, and so we started off in March. As I saw on Strava that some friends of mine or people I know had done one of the peaks I needed to do just like 3 or 4 days ago. And I thought like, yeah, so if they've done it, so probably the conditions will be good. But the thing is, like, it was 10th of March, and 10th of March is it's still very, very cold up there. On 4,000 meters, it's very, very cold. But I was like, yeah, I just like downloaded the GPX track and thought like, yeah, so let's go. I think that's fine. I had a friend of mine who had time and was motivated to do the peak or the peaks with me. And yeah, there were different kind of problems on the first tour. Basically, the first problem was the train wasn't going as early as usual. Before COVID, the train usually arrived there at about 8:30. Due to COVID, they didn't have too much guests up there, so they just like deleted this early train out of their schedule. So we've been up there maybe at 10 or 10:30, and we've been chatting with other alpinists up there we knew, like pro athletes. And so, yeah, we started off pretty late. Then it had been snowing a little bit, so we didn't have too much tracks. So we made our track up there, and then we just like couldn't go on the route they have gone because like the slope was super wind blown and there was a high avalanche danger. So we've been like 50 or 60 meters away from it, and when we made a step, it was a huge crack. But also friends of mine, what we found out later, made a track on a couloir, so we climbed this one and was like, so yeah, I've been up there already, but hey, it's 100 vertical meters, so let's tick off this peak as well and just like call it a good day. So we climbed up there, and then we needed to upsile, and as we didn't expect to climb this summit, so our rope was too short, so we had like just 30 meters of thin rope, so we had to down climb a little bit. Then when we got to the place where you put the skis on again, so it was like 50 or 60 k of wind. It's super cold. We had for sure make a new track, so we ticked up the summit. This was not a big thing, but then we had like the descent, and that's something, you know, I didn't really. I knew like I needed to be early, and yeah, that's the price you pay when you're impatient. So that's a big learning, and that's usually when I do mountaineering a big principle of mine. So I'm always telling everyone you need to be patient for these mountains. Wait till the conditions are good and then go. But in this kind of project with so many peaks to climb, it's impossible to wait always for the perfect conditions, because like there may be 1 day or 2 days where 5 peaks are in perfect condition, and so you just need to go. And then we were just like two of us, and we skied down on the rope over a glacier with like 50 centimeters of fresh snow with huge crevasses. It was really, really terrifying. And I was really, really tired. And that was the first moment when I realized, so it's not the physical thing that will really blow your mind. It's more the mental game that you have to face on this project. But yeah, it was definitely a great experience, and I was anyway just like able to finish the project successfully without any major accidents. But yeah, I just like can say after the project, it was an absolutely incredible experience, and it was super cool to explore so many new places. And I think that's like probably the biggest win of the whole project. It's not to having completed the list, but it's like the opportunity to explore new places you've not been before, and you just got there because you have this project. Um, but I totally underestimated the whole thing.
Well, that's really cool, and I can tell your passion for this is coming through immediately. So just and as I watched through these videos and kind of went on this journey with you, I will say all of these peaks were new to me. Kind of growing up and being based in the U.S. So it was really cool to see. So if I were to maybe describe the type of peaks and the style that you're climbing, right? I guess I would say these 4,000-meter peaks are by and large 1 or 2 day ascents, in which it requires typically a pretty long approach through the snow. Ideally on skis, but often in boots and crampons, and then it may require maybe ice climbing or mixed climbing where you're on rock or a mixture of rock, ice, snow to kind of get to the top with a varying level of exposure, and in some cases a pretty significant level of exposure where you have to do some really cool traverses on like flakes and those sort of things. And then, of course, you threw in the abseiling there. I know it is repelling, but kind of have to figure out how to safely come down. And so there's all these variables that are happening in order to achieve these achieve these peaks. Now I know you've talked a little bit about the timeline for this. When you first said 21 peaks in 21, my thought where my head went to was, oh, that's going to be really tough. With 52 weeks in the year, you've got to do a peak every 2 or 3 weeks. But the reality is, you were saying, that's not the way climbing works. It sounds like there's a pretty narrow weather window. And when the opportunity to climb is available, you kind of have to go. What is the climbing season, and like how did you handle that with all of your planning?
Yeah, I mean, problem was mainly that I still was working 50% as a medical doctor, just as a GP. And that thing that I had just like, I've been working 1 week and 1 week I've been off. So that was the one thing. And this was probably one thing that complicated things, because then you have the 1 week, you need to have the weather window, you need to have the conditions. And then the biggest problem is you need to have someone who has time and is also fit and you can rely on, because I'm very picky regarding the people I climb with, because as we all grow up with mountaineering, we make our experiences. I've had also some, let's tell them, interesting experiences on 4,000-meter peaks with people I didn't know before. So these are things that are probably kind of the problem, the thing. But the climbing season, yeah, for ski touring usually goes from March to June for these kind of peaks, depending on the amount of snow that is falling. And then the summer season, also depending on the winter, how much snow we get, usually starts in July, but quite often starts also in June, because if we don't have too much snow, it might happen that you will set out in June for certain peaks, because otherwise there will be bare ice and things will be pretty dangerous and require quite a lot of time. And as I mentioned before, like time is also a matter of safety, because like high alpine or high mountain sickness usually starts after 6 hours being exposed to the altitude. And so if you're in this 6 hour window, you climb a peak and climb down again safely, The only problem you might have is some vertigo and this kind of stuff, but you can handle it if you just like add some fluid to your body. So I never had any problems with the altitude, to be honest. I'm pretty happy about that. But it's not always the same, and that's something you need to like actually think about if you do a project like that, because the most important goal is always to come back home, because we're not going to a summit to be there and stay there. We're gonna go there and have those experiences to tell other people from them, or just like keep them for ourselves for a long time. So that's definitely probably the main problem on the whole project.
Um, and now too, you mentioned or alluded to some of the peaks were perhaps more remote, and others were congested, and all that. In terms of, I guess, in terms of the style, watching these videos, it's very different than the U.S., where you have the hut system available. So I guess, can you describe these huts and the size of them to perhaps a U.S. and or American viewer would be shocking? It seems like they're potentially capable of sleeping 100 people in some cases.
Yes, they're really huge huts. Like probably the heaviest example is probably the Hurnley hut on the foot of the Matterhorn. It's like, I think it's like about for 150 people, and it's super expensive. It's $150 a night for the dorm. And if you want to have a double room, or I think there are 2 double rooms or 4 double rooms, and there are like 4 like rooms for 4 people, that's still about 250 or 300. I'm not sure about the current prices. You have this free Wi-Fi, and it's kind of a hotel, up there. It's super crazy. But there are also like the small huts that you have maybe on the Golkomba, which is super familiar. They can sleep like 12 or 15 people, and you like doing all the kind of the dining together. So she will cook, but you will just like help washing the dishes. You need to call her when you're back that everything went well. So she's really telling you like, you call me when you're on the other side. So it's very different, just like depending where we're going to. Like there was like one pretty funny thing, because I mentioned that it was still kind of COVID, and for the Dordora, that's a peak which is straight on the Italian-Swiss border, and as the glaciers have been retreating quite a lot in the last years, no one is going from the Swiss side. So when we went there, basically there was lockdown in Aosta. People weren't allowed to go outside. So the only way to get there to the hut was actually crossing the borders with the skis and ski down to the hut. And I was just like, we just like called him, and we were expecting that the hut is closed, but we found out that it's regularly open. Because like, that's kind of an island. There is no mobile reception on the hut. And it's just like, no one knows if he's there or not. And it's a very interesting guy who is just like, if you wake up at 3 a.m., 2 a.m., whatever time, he will give you an Genepi, which is pretty high percentage alcohol. And
Okay.
you just like, I'm not really interested in drinking this for breakfast. Yeah, you need to, because otherwise you won't reach the summit. So it's very different depending on the places where you go. But you have this really crazy luxury style huts also in the Alps, and you have also this very small and familiar, kind of places which are
On
remote and
that,
not.
now on that specific adventure, were you already traveling, and did you cross the border not knowing whether the hut was open or not, or when did you find out that the hut was open?
And not only we called him a day before,
Okay.
just to ask him what we need, because all these huts usually have rooms for the winter. So if they're closed regularly, you can just like book a room or just go in the room for the winter. But it's mostly not really written what's in there. So is there a stove in there, or do you need a sleeping bag? So we were just like calling him actually regarding what equipment we need to take there. And then he just like told us, no, we are open. You just like can come and you can book your room. So yeah, we luckily found out the day before. But I actually had that one time, like 4 years ago or 3 years ago, when I first time climbed the highest summit of Switzerland, the Dufourspitze. There was also written that there's no water supply for the hut, so we are closed. And so we got there and we're thinking like, yeah, we're gonna stay in the winter room. And we found out that the hut is open, so this can happen.
Interesting. Okay, so it's very much a little bit of a you get what you get. The variables keep changing in the mountains. Now, when you stay the night at the hut, the next morning is everybody will everybody be kind of climbing the same mountain, the same route, and so it'll be really busy, or will there be one or two groups that maybe are joining you, or at least on the same route as you are?
And it depends for sure on the hut, because like I mean, if you're on the Hurnley hut, so probably 90% of the people will climb the Hurnley Ridge up to the Matterhorn. Few will climb some of the harder ridges up there. But yeah, in many huts, most people will be on the same hut, the same route on the same summit. But yeah, usually it's not a big deal. I think you can anticipate that pretty good. And usually what we do, we have the breakfast very short. So maybe we are 5 minutes at the breakfast, and then we are off actually. So we usually have all the gear already on and just like leave the house straight away.
I see. So your strategy is to perhaps get out a little bit ahead of the crowd on that one,
Yeah.
because now I think when you were reflecting back upon the trip, was there one peak where where you ran into a little bit of trouble on the rappel on the abseil, where there was a group that you were kind of waiting on?
Um, oh,
Where,
no, there was not that big of a
okay.
problem actually. We had a different kind of problem once, where we had like we were a group of three. It was a friend of mine. It was his last 4,000 meter peak, and brought his girlfriend because he wanted to share the summit with his girlfriend, the last 4,000 meter peak. And I was like asking him like if she was capable to climb the summit, and he was like, yeah, it's not a problem. She's not super good in skiing, but it's not a problem. I will take care of that. And yeah, it turned out that conditions weren't too easy. It took a lot of time as her crampons were falling off because they were not perfect for her ski boots. And yeah, so that's like always the same thing. If you just like break your principles, where you say I'm not climbing with people I've never climbed before, what I usually do, then yeah, that's exactly what you get. We had some arguing about that afterwards because I'm getting a little bit angry when someone puts me into danger and I'm not able to escape the situation. If I'm on a rope with someone who is not capable to climb that, it may put risk on myself, and that's something I'm always avoid. I'm fine with people where I know they can do it, but it's not a good feeling if you have this kind of situations. And so it was a pretty long day in the end. Yeah.
It sounds like that's a situation that can make for maybe an awkward experience and a long day as well. Now we've talked a lot about the about the risk and the, kind of handling the danger. I guess, what do you find most rewarding about climbing these peaks?
Um, yeah, the most rewarding thing is, and that's what if you step out in the dark and you start climbing and you walk and slowly the sun is rising, like slowly the colors are changing. And that's something I'm highly appreciating. And that's probably the most or the best gift you can do to yourself, like experiencing this moment when no one's around or just really less people, and you're like privileged to be able to be healthy, to move in this situation, to be skilled enough, to be patient enough to wait for the right conditions. And yeah, really seeing this, and these are memories I will actually never forget. And the summit is not specifically the highlight of the whole trip, because on the summit, and I think you can talk to various people which are climbing mountains with a certain amount of risk, it's just like halfway. It's just like when you're on the summit, most of the time, depending on the summit, you're thinking about the way back. And so the really relief, or the thing that you really made it, and you can reflect and soak in all the experiences when you're back at the car. And I think that's something that's very important to see. And it's not about just like making the tick on the list. So it's just like about the whole experience. So it's about the journey and not the destination. So I think that sums up the thing very well.
I like that. You definitely seem like very much a journey type of person. Um, and that's an interesting call out that right when you get to the top that you're only halfway there. And I found oftentimes when I was watching your videos, it seemed like there was actually an additional layer of difficulty or potentially danger coming down. It seems like every time you had to break trail, that was perhaps a cause for a concern.
Yeah, sure. The thing is, sometimes it's easier to get up there in the dark than finding your way back when it's daylight. So it's like the case on the Weisshorn, where we find the way pretty easy in the dark. We had our track on our watches, but on the way down, it was pretty hard to find actually the way down. It's pretty interesting because like yeah, if you have just like the headline, the headlamp, then it's just I don't know. Then it's just like easier because you just like see the next. Then you just see the next piece of stones which are like sorted above, and then you know there should be the trail. But on regular day, there are tons of those formations actually. And so also with the temperature rising, the risk obviously just like starts. We have a big problem here in the Alps with the permafrost, which leads to brittle rock and rocks falling down, with or without people out there. And I have had pretty yeah, interesting experiences in the past with those warm temperatures. So that's why the way down can be way more complicated than the way up.
Yeah, that's interesting. I find that I've done it a few different times where more on the rock climbing end when you start out so early and when you start with just a headlamp, it can almost reduce the world to just it's a way to like hyper focus yourself, which is a really fun feeling and a really exciting way to start the day. I find. Um, now Now, doing all of these mountains, kind of in the context with filming it, and then also putting that sort of timeline on you, if you will. Did you find that ultimately helped and aided you in terms of like maybe pushing you to push forward, or did you find that you struggled with that, with potentially assessing some of the danger, or did you feel like you were pushing too hard to make the timeline?
The thing is, and that's something I knew before, that this project would lead to, yeah, to the situation where you would need to take more risk than you would take normally. And I knew that I would need to actually go in not perfect conditions. And that's something I've been training before. So I was like, yeah, I wanted to be in a situation that I can climb this also in conditions that are not perfect. And I think if you do this kind of project, you will need to be able that. And just like if you have that in your mind, um, you're kind of like prepared for it. But it's anyway not a really great situation when you realize that things are going that way. But yeah, I think that's in this situation something you can't avoid. And also, in the summer of 2021, it was pretty interesting weather. So it was a lot of precipitation in July. And I was actually aiming to do quite a lot of peaks in July. And it's been snowing quite a lot. So really tons of snow, which turned out to be a very good thing in the end, as we could climb a route that you usually can climb in early July, and we climbed it mid-August. But this was probably a big challenge, and this was like the first time when I was not sure if I would make it. That's something which was interesting. And there was another thing that was pretty interesting. I never asked myself if I could climb all the peaks, if I was like be able to face the difficulties, because I just like started this project, and there was not this question, can I do it? I will be able to do it because I just like put this goal on the table. And that's something, I mean, mindset is a big part of life, where you will probably agree. And if you have this kind of mindset that, there's no other way, then you will be able to.
I really like that you didn't necessarily assess the difficulty. It sounds like you were just so driven to do this that you just wanted to put it out there and go for it.
Yeah, I would never have a problem actually to turn around. This was a thing I never was like being afraid or something like that. The only thing I wouldn't have accepted for myself is not even have tried it at one summit. So if I wouldn't have made it to complete all the summits, but I would have tried all of them and conditions were not favorable or whatever happened, I would have been fine with that. But that was just something I at least want to go for it and try.
Did you have to, I saw a few times where you had to retreat back to the hut and maybe spend the night, and then you could make a second attempt the next day. But were there any times where you didn't have the time and you had to leave the mountain and come back to it?
Not during the project, actually.
Okay.
During the project, everything went well. I've had that in the past. I had that on Mont Blanc. We climbed it in a day from Chamonix, which is probably one of the longest ski tours you can do in the Alps. It's nearly 4,000 vertical meters of climbing. I'm not sure how to translate it into feet, but it's quite a lot of work to climb, to be honest. And on the project, we had just once on the last summit, because we've been there and booked probably the last spots in the hut, and we knew the conditions would be good. But when we stood under the face, it's a north face, which leads up 55 degrees steep terrain. It's all snow in our situation, but it's 550 vertical meters. It's just straight up to the summit. So you top out maybe 10 meters to the right of the summit, but there was like 160 kilometers of wind on the ridge, which we were actually would climb after the summit to get off the mountain safely, because no one usually down climbs the face if it's not like powder and you just like can walk down. And so we stood there and we nearly fell when we stood on the glacier because of the high wind speeds. And it was super clear for both of us that it wouldn't make sense to step into the wall, because there can be rocks, there can be ice falling down on your head, and if it hits you, you will fall down. And so it was not a big problem to turn around. It was more the problem would we get a spot actually in the hut for another night. It was not a problem of time. And we got pretty lucky because like a group of 4 actually decided to not sleep there and go down to the valley. And so we grabbed their spots, and so everything went well.
Perfect. It all worked out. I wanted to put all this in conversation with you doing these difficult peaks and these, dangerous peaks, but also trying to film it. There were only a few moments where I know you mentioned that you that you felt it was so on your limit that you actually put the camera down. And I'm going to try this one. Is it the, and you'll have to forgive me because my pronunciation, I can barely speak English. So that's only one language. Is it the Liscombe Traverse?
Yeah.
That is
Yeah,
an
the Liscombe
incredible traverse. Yeah, go ahead.
It is. It is definitely, and the mountain is also called the Man-Eater because there have been some accidents in the past, and it's kind of a mental game, this traverse. But we had really good conditions. We had some bare ice on the start of it, but after the first summit, which you actually not really recognize as a summit because just like the trail just leads over it, and it's like kind of the highest point, but actually no one cares because the other summit, the eastern one, is way higher. So that's basically the summit of the route, and afterwards it gets really narrow. So it's really both of your feet fit on the ridge, but that's it. There's not much more space, and you just like go on it. And I didn't feel too good on this day actually. I had
And
kind of headache.
how far is the fall on either side when your feet are narrow? Yeah.
It's both about 600 or 700 meters.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, it's pretty unlikely that it will survive when you fall down. But I think everyone agrees that even though it looks very tough and dangerous, it still takes quite a lot to fall off a mountain. I've had some close calls during my adventures, not in this project, not too much, but I have had on easier mountains some of these things. But it always, yeah, there must be some of really unlucky circumstances to make you really fall off the mountain. You still have an ice axe and all this kind of stuff. But this ridge really narrows, and there's one situation or one point on it where you have like a kind of a rock piece in the middle of the thing. And I was standing there, and you need to, and usually I have my camera just right hang around my body to have it like when I need it, because otherwise I won't take any images. And I have a 360 cam on my helmet, which gives me the best flexibility to have a lot of footage, which I can reframe, have different kind of angles, and just like transport this the situation I've been to. But it's also very uncomfortable if you're like on this small and narrow pathways with the heavy weight of the 360 cam on the top. It's not a good situation if you have already vertigo, what I had this day. I'm used to that. I've had that on several peaks. I can handle it, but it's still something which makes you be more careful. And I was just like going around this rock piece, and the problem is afterwards, you were just like standing backward. You need to turn around on this narrow piece of nature, basically. And so I just like lost my one part of my camera, which just like for the sun, just like fell down the south face. So I was like, okay, I need to turn around with all this gear just hanging around me. It's not possible for me to perform this move. And so I was standing there on this rock, put off my backpack, and just like put all my kind of gear back in my backpack. And then I just like could slowly perform this move. And I don't know, I actually forgot the name, but there's like a pretty popular mountaineer who was said in an interview, like in moments where it's getting really serious, usually no one is shooting or filming. And that's something I definitely can totally relate to. And like the main goal of the project was in the end for sure like doing all the peaks. And so I always said from the beginning, if there's a situation which is high risk with also camera around my neck, I will put down the camera in my backpack and concentrate on the climbing. And I think, yeah, that's the better option than falling down.
I think that's the right call to make. So your camera setup in strategy in order to film this project. It sounds like you're taking two cameras with you, mainly on the mountain, and then would you take a drone as well, or what's the rules surrounding that?
Yes, I've been taking drones as well, depending on the peak, depending if there's a no-fly zone or not. Always keep the rules. That's something that is very important with drones. I think it's always very important to ask the other people which are on the summit if it's okay if you fly the drone, because most of the people don't like it. I don't like the sound of the drone by myself as well. I don't like it. But it's just like in this kind of project, I wanted to bring as much as possible and show as much as possible. And drones is a really good tool. But just depending on the route and on the list come, I mean, it would have been amazing to fly a drone up there, but we've been pretty much in a hurry because it's a fun story. Um, as I told you before, it's like quite of a touristic feature, especially the spaghetti tour, which is the Liscam is part of the spaghetti tour, and it's called spaghetti tour because it's on the border of Switzerland and Italy, and the huts are basically all in Italy. And so all the people go to the hut in Italy and eat spaghetti. And so that's the reason why it's called spaghetti tour. But it's really popular and many people want to do it. So the huts usually are booked. And, I'm not planning my mountain adventures 3 months ahead. So I just wait for the conditions to apply and then I look for a hut. So we actually realized that there was no sleeping spot for the hut. So there were two bivouacs on the spaghetti tour, um, which are first come, first serve. And so that's why we always started very early and tried to be as early as possible at the bivouac. And so this meant one thing, we needed to bring also sleeping bag and we needed to bring also food and a stove to cook. And so this meant there was not like the space in the backpack was full, so we couldn't bring a drone. I just like brought one camera with one lens and one GoPro and one 360 cam, which is still probably a lot for many mountaineers, but for me it's like the base setup to be able to capture as many moments as possible.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we were talking about a little bit off camera before this started. But I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts on, because it seems like it's just such a heavy lift trying to do the logistics, the strategy, the actual physically climbing the mountains, and as well as the filming. In the future, I mean, are you still inspired to do this again? Would you do it with a film crew? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, I'm still doing it by myself, but personally, as I want to improve as a filmmaker, I prefer to have someone with me who is filming or have an athlete which I can accompany because I really enjoy to make the best possible work in this environment. That's something which I'm super passionate about. But I'm still, interested in this kind of project where I actually can see what can I do by myself, no one supporting me, what kind of quality can I serve. Um, so I think it's just like it's super different if you do like the job as a filmmaker or photographer, or if you do all the things together, because the result will be totally different. And the main purpose of this YouTube videos was to capture like how is it to do this kind of project as a completely normal human. Sure, I have been training for it, but my message is if you have a goal and you are passionate about your goal and you want to reach it, really you want to reach it by your heart, then you are able to achieve it. And that's the main message I want to send with this project, not to show everyone that I'm the best mountaineer. I'm not the best mountaineer. It's not about that. But Alex Lower said it right. The best mountaineer is the one who has the most fun, and I think that's something to keep in mind.
I like that. I've heard that in many different iterations, right? The best skier is the one who's having the most fun, the whole thing. Along those lines, do you have a particular peak that stands out in your mind as just a fun experience?
Um, in terms of the project, the last peak, the Landspitz, is probably the most special one because climbing the face, has been a kind of a lifetime goal. When I saw the face the first time back in 2016, it was kind of this small dream to one day be able to climb this face. And climbing this face in excellent conditions in like 1 hour and 15 minutes, completely in the dark, and waiting for the sunrise on the summit was probably one of the most special moments I've ever experienced in my life. Like for sure, like the birth of my daughter was also an absolute incredible experience. But like in terms of mountaineering, it was probably one of the most intense moments I've always had. And like if you just like asking for a climb that is for me special and fun, it's probably still my first 4,000 meter peak. It's the Mönch. I mean, it's easy accessible by train and it's like 600 vertical meters. But for me, it still has one of the best panoramas you can find in the Alps, and I always enjoy to be there because it's still a little bit technical, but not too hard. It has an incredible ridge, and the panorama is phenomenal, and it's such a crazy thing because you stand there and you see the train station 600 meters below you, and still you're such a remote situation and remote place, and that's something that is fascinating me quite a lot.
I really like the duality and the dynamic that you describe. It sounds like a lot of fun and really inspiring. Now, when you got back off the mountain after that climb, the Linspitz, and it's now you've now completed the 21 and 21. What were your immediate thoughts? Were you too exhausted to process it, or too overwhelmed, or did you have like an overwhelming sense of accomplishment?
Um, there was this first thing was probably this kind of relief, and when we got back to the hut where you still can fall down, accidents happen on the descent from the hut actually every year, but you know I can handle that. But it was just like this kind of disbelief that I actually made it. This was probably the first feeling when we returned to the hut, and to process actually all these things. This takes many days actually. But yeah, when we got back to the car, so my sponsors called me and congratulated. There was yeah, quite a lot of endorphins and yeah, a lot of adrenaline rushing and really happy moments. But to process all the whole project and all also the mistakes, um, this took quite a while, and that's the reason why I didn't do like this Q&A and this reflecting video straight afterwards. So I think it did it like 2 or 3 months later, because it takes time to reflect and think about what mistakes did you do, or what unnecessary risks did you take for the project, and what's your assumption of the whole project, and what do you want to tell to people which are thinking about this kind of project or whatever project they ever think about. And that's something that for me is very important, because this project was for sure my motivation, but the biggest sense of the whole project, as I told before, is like to tell people that it's worth to go for your goals, go for your dreams, and if you really want something, you will be able and capable of doing it. And that's the biggest message.
I like that, and that's a great takeaway from that project. Now, I know at the time when you had the chance to process and kind of reflect on it, um, I think you were perhaps felt complete but I did want to bring it back up again. I know you got one of the questions, and so because you did the accomplish the 48 peaks in Switzerland, but the total number is 82, right? That span of 4,000 meter peaks that span the whole Alps. Do you have any interest in expanding the scope to climb all of those?
There are definitely some routes I definitely want to do, depending on the conditions. Yeah, last year I became father in April, and anyway, conditions been not very good in the Alps. We had really a lack of snow, and in my opinion, at times pretty bad conditions and risky conditions. And actually, people I know have had really bad accidents. And so that's why I didn't focus too much last year on it. Yeah, as I've been like doing the transformation, being a photographer and videographer full time, which took quite a lot of time and strategy and thinking about, and yeah, kind of a new life. We've been moving in Switzerland to a new place. Yeah, all those kind of things that happen. But yeah, I'm definitely want to go like for the Gros Traverse, which is something that is, I think, a really special tour in terms of the panorama and the whole surrounding. And the Agivert is high on my list. As for me, it's one of the most beautiful peaks in the Alps. I don't know if you have ever seen a picture of it, but it's such a proud mountain and just so perfect. It's the perfect shape, and yeah, it's really nice. And that's something I really want to do. And also the Red Kufner on the Mormoni. But yeah, last year the bivouac fell down on the Kufner Red, which is not a problem. I don't need a bivouac, so I'm fine with that. I still can handle that walking a little bit more, but the whole face where you climb up is probably not super stable with the warm temperatures, the lack of snow. So yeah, I get back to my initial thing, what I'm saying, just like be patient and wait for the right conditions and go. So that's something I definitely want to do. If I will be able to climb all 82 4,000 meter peaks, no, it's not super high on my list. I'm more interested in regions like the Ekra Massif, which is very far to the west and to the south. There are also two 4,000 meter peaks, and the climb of these peaks is more like the motivation to go in the region and spend some time there. So the climbing of the peak is just one day, but I want to stay there for maybe 2 weeks and really explore and appreciate the area. And so like the peak is more the motivation to explore some new places, and that's something which is much more important than just like the summit.
I love it. Lots on your plate and lots of excitement to come. Congrats on becoming a father, by the way. Now, I notice a lot, or all of these maybe future ambitions are relatively close to home. Is that something that you're conscious of? I know you've spoken a little bit before in some of your films about trying to be environmentally conscious and having a limited footprint. Is that a conscious decision?
Yeah, I think everyone who is going in those high mountains won't ever like talk anything like climate change is not happening. I mean, if you're out there, you're alive at it. You see what climate change means. You see it really right in front of your eyes, and so that's the one thing. And the other thing is like kind of a project I've been starting as a photographer like 5 or 6 years ago, when I've been seeing a lot of images from Iceland and other countries. I was thinking like we have glaciers here too, we have valleys, we have mountains. So I started this kind of personal project, what I've not been telling anyone, just like to find places that look similar to places I've seen from other countries and photograph them and show them, which are close to home or in the Alps. And so I think it's just like worth to check out your backyard and not just like look for beaches on the Seychelles or whatever, because it can be absolutely enriching to explore your home, and that's what I've been doing in the last years. Doesn't mean that I'm not trying somewhere. I'm just like thinking very conscious about it. Last year I've been flying the first time since 2018 for a job to Tenerife. This year I will fly in a little bit more. I've been to South Africa recently, but this is more in terms of education and a little bit of holiday. And I will fly to Norway next week for ski touring and shooting and this kind of stuff. But still, I'm thinking about before I go, and I think we really should think about if it's necessary to fly to New York for 1 day or 2 days for shopping. I think there are things that are not really fitting in the times we are facing right now. But in the end, everyone needs to decide. But I think um, most of us or many people have kids, and I think we have a responsibility, yeah, in their regards actually, because like we will pass out at some point. We never know when it is, but I think we should at least think a little bit about what we're doing to leave the planet livable, actually, when we are not here anymore.
Well said. Yeah, it's definitely on your mind and on everyone's mind. Wow, and you've got a lot of exciting projects. It sounds like that are upcoming for 2023. Any closing thoughts before we sign off?
No, I just like can tell everyone to be humble and be thankful for the things we have. And like every day when I'm walking off a mountain and maybe I have a hard day, the weather is bad, it's cold or whatever, and you tend to be annoyed. Then I just like reflect and think like be thankful that you're healthy and be able to walk up that mountain and experience whatever it is. Because I think like if you think about it, in 5 years you not even remember that moment where you're stuck in it right now. And so I think it's good to keep that in mind and stay humble and yeah.
Absolutely. Over time, the challenges tend to fade, and you remember the best parts.
Yeah.
Maximilian, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I truly enjoyed the 21 and 21 series, and I look forward. Your channel will be linked below, and I look forward to all the upcoming videos.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. It was a pleasure. And I hope I can inspire a few people to explore their background and just like enjoy life and remember that life is now and not tomorrow.